So anyway, for the sake of the recording, I'm introducing Anton Demenchuk. Anton serves our community with unselfish generosity through many civic and religious organizations where he serves on a variety of boards. He consistently shares his business expertise and unparalleled value-based leadership style. He is unwavering in his efforts to always promote and establish a community with any organization he serves. You know, it's interesting. I didn't sleep very well last night. I was still up reading this morning at 3 o'clock, and I just finished up reading. I decided to read the book of Genesis in the Bible again, and I was shocked. I didn't realize, but community was mentioned in that book of the Bible. So I'm certain we will all be inspired and have many thoughts to share during the mastermind following Anton's talk. Lost Connection, the Soviet Boy Story continued. And I urge each of you to kind of stay with us if you can, because the value of this program will be in the mastermind following Anton's talk. The Lost Connection, the Soviet Boy Story continued. Take it away, Anton, my dear friend.
Well, thank you so much, Glenn. Thanks so much, everybody, guys. Every time Glenn reads this little passage off of my LinkedIn, I'm like, I need to change it. there's quite a few things out there that could be simplified and just gonna be done in a very streamlined fashion. It's awesome to see all of you guys here. Some of you I call friends, and I don't take it lightly. With some of you I serve on various boards. Eric, Deborah, known you guys forever and ever. Marsha, Mishi, and Becca, Tom. We're in the same organization we call Chattanooga Marketing Clinic, where we help local small businesses and startups to get going, to get started. And so it's really good to see all of you guys just here on one screen. So hopefully it's gonna get to the point where we're gonna shake our hands, hug each other, and just spend time in one room. So, well, there's some sort of a breath of fresh air around this little community that you guys have built here. And I'll tell you right away, the reason for this is just very apparent. Like, you have to really be blind not to see it. I talk every once in a while on Zooms and things like that, and I participate in various calls. I'm sure you do as well. And I just last week I was on a call where nobody had their webcam on, and everybody turned their microphones off, and it was just so unusually. It was a pretty good crowd in there, but still, it's just everybody takes a minute here to turn their cameras on, to make an eye contact, say hello, and just so you see value in that. And that's again, there's something really positive and good about it. Bob, I see you waving. So, well, so what I wanted to do this time is I actually went back and watched that YouTube link that Glenn sent from our last talk, and I was like, oh my goodness, the way I stretched that talk to unbelievable length, and the way I just kind of went around and around certain things. What I wanted today is I wanted to boil it down to something very specific, and then leave plenty of time for us to discuss, talk, bounce ideas off of each other, because I think that's where true value comes in. It's not from one person speaking. It's this exchange. It's this connection. It's this community that we're having here. So, just like last time, I want to start with this thing. Let's all be honest. Let's all just come into this little environment that Glenn has created for us, and just say, it's okay not to be okay. I think it's important. Every time we meet at the marketing clinic, we kind of say that, right? When a collection of business owners come together and everybody comes and says, how are you doing? Oh, I'm wonderful. Oh, I'm great. Oh, everything is great. Well, there's not much of a connection happening, one, right? And there's not much of an ability for another person to come in and help you with something, because you're saying you're fine, everything's great. And so what I encourage all of us, at least this morning, at least for this next, an hour or so we're going to be spending here, let's just come as we are and say it's okay not to be okay. Let's create this little safety environment here, because I think there's just a little too much of the opposite that's happening in the society today. Instagram is on the rise, right? It's one of the major platforms out there, and that platform, that social media platform, is all about putting your life in just the most wonderful, um, turning like an angle on your life in just the best way possible. And it's not uncommon to spend lots and lots of money and travel to some remote location and take a wonderful picture and post it on your social media and say, look at me and look how wonderful my life is. Well, two things are happening when that's going on. First, you're lying. Your life is not that wonderful. Let's just be honest. And two is that it makes another person very miserable, because I look into your social media and I go, my goodness, I've never been to this place. I don't have that much money to go to this place. I've never met this kind of person. And all of a sudden I'm going through this comparison, my life to your life. And it doesn't make me any happier than I am. So today what I wanted for us to discuss is what we kind of started talking about last time, is lost connection. What does it mean? And what are the implications, and how do we avoid that? So Glenn encouraged me to speak a little bit me last time. I never do, if you've noticed it. Some of you actually I've known for years and years, and some came as a result of the last meeting. They were like, "Oh, we didn't know any of these facts about you." And so I'll run really briefly. I don't want to spend too much time here. I want to jump into this meat of our discussion. So the reason it's called Soviet Boy Story, there's a title for this talk, is because I was born in the Soviet Union. Just really briefly, what I want to say, it's an interesting environment. It's an interesting way of running things. It's a different mentality, it's different culture, and it's a very interesting. I mean, that's really the word that I want to use here, even though it's my background and everything, but it's just, especially for a Western mind, going in and just trying to make sense out of what's going on. It's not that easy. Things are being ran in a very kind of interesting way, and a lot of post-Soviet countries, even today, they still kind of suffer from that. So I come, my country in Ukraine, we're still kind of suffering from kind of cutting any sort of connections with that post-Soviet centralized, ineffective kind of mentality. So there's a lot of positive things as well, really briefly about my parents, I thought it was an interesting fact to share. So my mom and my dad, they met when they were both part of the Soviet space program. So my dad was an engineer. My mom was basically his subordinate, and so they met. That's how they met, and they created a family and all. So they were both in the space program, which is kind of interesting things. And we always had some really interesting people around us. And since I was a kid, my grandpa also was a director of a hotel at some point, where all the cosmonauts stayed. So I don't know. Just Glenn said, bring some interesting facts about you. It's not necessarily about me, but something about. So we had like a stacks of pictures about the space and the launches and the first guy who went to space. And my grandpa would tell stories how he shook his hand and how they had a little chit chat and things like that. And so I had a good family when I was growing up. I was a very shy kid. I think I was protected a little bit from the outside world, from outside elements. And so I was very shy. I was shy to the point where, again, with my coaching with Glenn, he said, you gotta mention that story, which is, there's nothing to be proud of, but it's kind of embarrassing. But I was extremely shy. So at the age of 7, I was 7 years old. My mom said, it's time. You got to get out of the house. You got to go and say hello to another human being, And so she said, go to the store and buy bread, something as simple as that. And so she gives me money, and I go to this store, and I go, I got to give her money, and I'm going to say, give me bread. Give her money, give me bread. So I show up in the front of this salesperson in the store. It wasn't a supermarket style. It was just kind of like a counter style. And so I go, here's the money, give me bread. And I'm like, I'm done. This is exactly what I'm here to do. And I turn around and I walk away. So she chases me and she says, hey, you forgot the bread. That's what you came here for. and I thought, I mean, I was so paranoid that she's there going after me because I thought I did something. I don't know. It was just, I was a very kind of interesting kid growing up. So that's at the age of 7, right? So I'm extremely shy. Um, Now, then what started happening is the Soviet Union broke into pieces, right? And so all the countries that went through that breakup, that Soviet Union breakup, just their economies just started going through some pretty terrible times. And so 90s were extremely tough for my country, for Ukraine. So my dad was given a choice to retire at the age of 48. Just think about it. He started getting a pretty good sized pension. We could live off of it. Money started becoming the extreme inflation and things like that, but still it was, I think, adjusted for it. And so, so in a way, we didn't necessarily struggle as a family, but my dad did. And so when you are 48-year-old man who was one of the top engineers in the Soviet space program, and all of a sudden you're planting tomatoes in your backyard. Well, that's a trouble waiting to happen. It's a man with no game, is what I call. Um, and it's not just about a man out there. It's just, I think every human being needs a game, needs something to do, needs something, needs to go out there and accomplish something, and then come back home and talk to your spouse, talk to your friend, family, kids about what's going on out there, because that's how we learn. So my dad was, all of a sudden, he was fairly young. He technically didn't have to work, but he was struggling. My mom ended up getting 2 jobs to kind of support us all, and things like that. And so my dad starts drinking. Um, so and that becomes an event, an experience in our family in itself. So a man with no game is a dangerous mix. And I'm 10 years old, and my dad becomes very unstable very quickly. Within basically a few years, he decided to basically end his life end his conscious life, at least, with alcohol. And so all of a sudden, I'm 10 years old, and I'm being told, "You're the man of the family. We count on you." And so just a few years ago, I didn't know how to buy bread, and all of a sudden here, my mom says, "This family depends on you." And she was smart to say that, because it really didn't at that point, but she was preparing me for, listen, you got to go for something more in this life. And so at the age of 13, something started happening in my life. I started discovering and looking for something. So my search got me into just all kinds of mm, uh, making sense of life type activities. This is where I started reading. I started discovering just really random things, but I think that started connecting certain dots for me and propelled me to go forward. Like, for example, I mentioned this one thing, which I think was also kind of interesting, that's very memorable. I started reading some Eastern philosophers about appetite, and they say that the person who can control his or her appetite can do anything. And I had this thing where I knew I had to optimize myself, right? I have to prepare myself for life. And so I started doing all kinds of, I think for a year and a half, I started doing just all kinds of things with experiments with food. And I started fasting for no reason. I started eating certain things. And I can probably say that I think I've gotten myself to that point. I really don't care about food even today. And I think, like last time I mentioned, I think somebody was laughing here as I was saying this. My wife Christina, I mean, she can tell you, like, this guy just does not care about food. I eat because I have to. That's I'm not saying go do it. It's a pretty not a good idea to do. A pretty dumb idea to actually experiment, because I think right now I have some sort of stomach issues and all that, and I think it's somehow connected to this. But at that point, at the age of 13, to me, somehow developing healthy habits became extremely important. Optimizing myself just became like this one idea that I would go to sleep and wake up with, because I knew I had to prepare myself for life. So I knew education is a way out. I knew reading is a big deal. And again, mind you, I'm 13 and I'm 14 years old, and all that's happening kind of in my head. I started discovering these things, what I call today life design protocols. I do believe that life is designed based on a very specific set of principles. And we know them, we know they work. And if we know how they work, life becomes very, very predictable. We all of a sudden start, like for example, and I gave this example last time, and I think it's just a good example. Like if I grab this a pen, right, and I let it go, I know a future event. I know it's going to go down, and I know it's going to fall on the floor, and it's going to go. It's not going to go up, left, right. If we just think of life being the same way, life being designed based on a set of very predictable laws and rules, that they're just there. It's like gravity. We all of a sudden can predict the future. We all of a sudden know what works, what doesn't. We all of a sudden know certain things about people that we didn't know before, things like that. So life design protocols and all kinds of just function, design and function around me. So that somehow they became very important to me. I think that kind of fed into what I do today in marketing. Another principle that I think was really big that I discovered was life was built upon was a principle of giving. Life is built upon that principle. If you ever want to receive anything in this life, we first have to give, and we somehow, in the back of our minds, subconsciously, we know it. But let me remind you that giving something to another person and expecting something in return, that is not called giving. It's just not called giving. So I encourage you to just think about the fact that life is built upon that principle of giving. So I was able, again, I'm 13, 14, 15, 16, and I'm making sense out of life. It's fascinating, but I could not make sense out of one thing, and it was my dad. I didn't understand how a successful, highly intelligent guy decided to basically end his life in such a miserable way. So one thing just kept bugging me, and I said, look, I gotta figure this out. So up until recently, really just a few years ago, so I started reading about this example. I mentioned this last time. I think it's kind of crucial to our talk here. So Bruce Alexander did an experiment where he took a traditional example of where a rat is being put in the box and are given two types of water. One is morphine saturated water, and one is just regular water. And classical experiment goes in a very predictable fashion. Again, life is very predictable. This experiment is very predictable. Rat goes, sitting in the box, goes to morphine water, overdoses itself, and over time dies. It's been conducted many times. We know exactly what's happening. The conclusion, and again, that's another piece of what I kind of want to mention here, is the conclusion. And it just tells us a little bit about how we draw conclusions, how we're very premature thinkers, and how we're very kind of quick to think and not necessarily sometimes correct. And so the conclusion of the experiment says morphine is addictive. That's why a rat goes towards morphine water, overdoses, and dies. Stay away from drugs, right? But Bruce Alexander started this experiment in the same exact fashion. He puts a rat in the box. The rat goes towards morphine water, starts being addicted. He then takes this rat out of the box and puts it in what he called a rat park. Think of it as a heaven for rat. Like it's a most perfect environment for a creature like rat. It's got all kinds of obstacles out there. It's got a rope to climb on. It has a bunch of different things to do. And it's a way more bigger space. It's a spacious environment versus a little box that was sitting before. And all of a sudden, that addicted rat, and if we draw a conclusion that morphine is highly addictive and there's just nothing you can do about it, well, then this experiment should go in such direction that rat would still go towards. Oh, and by the way, there's still two types of water in that park, in that little rat heaven. And the rat's supposed to, right? So if we kind of, continue that conclusion a little further, the rat's supposed to go towards the same type of water, still overdoses itself, and it eventually dies. But then he observes something very, very different, that the consumption of the morphine saturated water decreases drastically. So a rat all of a sudden cares a lot less about morphine water than it did before. Interesting. But it still consumes that morphine water. Not as much, a lot less, but it still does. And he started asking questions, and he did it multiple times. And then as a third step to this experiment, he also put other rats in that park. And the consumption of morphine water decreased to basically zero. So hold on. I thought morphine is highly addictive. Now, these type of experiments tell us a little bit about how, again, we've been thinking about something for centuries and a long time, that something is true, but then we are now discovering that maybe there's more. And all that there is to this little chit chat that we're having today is maybe there's more to everything and anything that we ever thought was true. Maybe there's more. So when a rat had a social life, had interesting things to do, had lots of goals and lots of challenges and lots of just interesting life, bigger, interesting, and social life, all of a sudden addictions were not an issue. And I wonder, how true is it with people? When you have a bigger, more spacious, more interesting, more ambitious, goal-oriented life and very social, since we're talking about lost connection, and very social, how our lives would be different. So this is where I started understanding my dad. He was a social guy, but in his mind, he thought that he was ostracized, that he was not what he used to be. His identity was tied to a specific, performance, specific title, and all of a sudden he didn't have that. And so I started understanding my dad. He just simply lost connection. And yet he was surrounded with people. So in this day and age where, the coronavirus quarantine and things like that, we're all kind of on our own. We're all kind of lost our connections, right? We're at our homes. We're not seeing as many people as we used to. And even if we do, sometimes we're surrounded with people and we don't feel like we're connecting. So is there anything that we are doing on our end that prevents that connection from happening? And so that's my kind of question that maybe for discussion here in just a couple of minutes. Is there anything I do on my end that prevents me from connecting with other people? Society tells us that we are worth as much as we produce. We are worth based on how we look. We are worth based on how much money we make, right? Just based on who we are. And I'm here to tell you that is not true. We're worth a lot more. And this life is bigger and more interesting. The goals can be set higher. We can all be a little more connected. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of talk about here is the application. So what is the application of this whole idea of a lost connection? If there's anything on my end that prevents me from connecting with others, for the most part, I would say it's being self-centered. When I think of myself, my issues, my problems, we're going through depression at times, right? It could be a soft depression, could be just a, software, not a hardware depression, right? At times, folks go through a clinical depression. But one of the best examples, and I've sent a link last time in the, and I can, when we're going to be discussing here right now, I can find this link again. There's an article out there in Psychology Today magazine that talks about two types of goals. And I thought that was really well connecting with what we're talking about here today. It talks about two types of goals. One is self-image goal. It's a category of goals where we worry about ourselves. And the question is, again, just kind of something to ask yourself is, how much of these type of goals am I having in my life, right? Self-image goals. Do I need to have a bigger position, a longer title, an extra 3 letters after my name, a bigger house, nicer car, any sort of status, self-image goals. And a second bucket, a second category of goals are goals oriented towards others, right? Compassionate goals, what they call. Um, and they say that if you're going through a minor depression, then focusing on others is a very effective treatment to that depression. And I thought that was really interesting. And I thought that what they're talking about in this article is what I was trying to say in the beginning of this talk. When we are losing our connection and everything becomes all about me, it's a pretty stale, it's a pretty stagnant lake. It doesn't have any sort of ins and outs, flows through it and things like that. So how much more of a compassionate goals should we probably be having in our lives? What are compassionate goals? How much of impact am I making in other people's lives, right? Am I making any sort of difference out there for one individual human being on a daily basis? Psychologists today basically say that you will be a lot happier if we do that. So in other words, if we tie it with the lost connection idea, if we regain, right, if we restore that connection, truly meaningful, human, very fundamental, very simple, but something that is life-giving to you, if we restore that connection. So again, we're kind of jumping into the applications, right? So mental health may not be a problem for us, right? Addictions, we already talked about addictions, should not be a problem for us, right? So there's all kinds of health implications where they say that worrying creates inflammatory cascades in your body that just keep propelling. And we all know that chronic inflammation is one of the things that causes cancer, right? So are there any sort of health implications here that we're just totally forgetting and totally not discussing? Can we build better relationship with others if we're not self-centered as much? What if we're getting together with our close ones, our friends and family, for the sake of connecting and not for the sake of talking about who I am and how wonderful I am and focusing so much on this image goals oriented? Hey, Maurice, we'll see you later. I think he's partying. Yeah. Let's think about a business application. I know some of us are here into business, startups, small businesses and all. What about business applications? So in marketing, we're kind of finally getting to where what I'm really comfortable speaking about is marketing. If you have your own organization, if you work in an organization, you have your own department, you are into marketing because you got to talk about your projects to higher authorities. You have to present certain things. You have to be communicating with others, and that's what connection is marketing. And so how much better businesses can we build? How much more long-term businesses can we build when we understand this whole idea of a lost connection and how detrimental it is for us? So there's this idea that when we talk at the marketing clinic here, quite often, we talk about me marketing versus you marketing, right? So me marketing would be, you go to my website and you look at the any sort of messaging that's out there, or you meet me in person and I shake your hand and they say, well, tell me more about, Cresco Group, about your company. And I go, well, we are, and my services and our awards and our past projects and me marketing. There's this opposite idea is what we call you marketing, right? So if you go to my website or you meet me in person and I go, I'm here to solve your problem. I'm here all about you. And I've understood you enough that I've built a product, a solution to a very specific problem of yours. And I'm here to make it happen. It's all about you. Just a study shows that these are much more effective messages, that businesses are built around needs of others are successful, both short-term and long-term. So again, we talked about addictions, health, mental health, relationship, business, any sort of growth in marketing that you may be experiencing. And again, we talked about depression. We talked about that lost connection that I think we're all going through right now in some sort of a minor fashion. we're all disconnected. We're all quarantined. Hopefully not up until long. But I think this time is here for us to um, get us to think about certain things. And what we call at Marketing Clinic is we're sharpening a saw right now, right? This may be a time to go back and rethink certain principles, certain, again, life design protocols is what I call. And maybe we should be a little bit more smart about understanding them, understanding what life is based on, and certain principles it operates based on. And maybe we could be a little bit more effective in relationship, in business, and could be a little more successful and happy. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of, this is what I wanted to stop. And then what I wanted to do is just kind of open up the floor here for any sort of thoughts. We've touched on a couple of things, right? So we've touched on my dad. And I don't know, I'm very sensitive around these type of issues. So I don't know if you or maybe somebody you know is going through something like this. And there's a way we could help them just by simply being there, right? So we could talk about that if you guys want. We talked about the little experiment, that social component, that lost connection, the application. So whatever, Glenn, I'm going to let you kind of get us started. And I would love to hear your feedback, any sort of thoughts that you have. Yeah, so we can just take it from there.
Thank you, Anton. And right quickly, because I know we'll miss it if we don't do it now. For those of you that are not familiar with Chattanooga Marketing Clinic, and Diane, you may be the only one, it is free, and Anton conducts that virtually now. And boy, it is an example of real community. Tell us about how we can join the Chattanooga Marketing Clinic, Anton.
Simply Google it. You'll see a website that's going to pop up first on the list, and click on it. There's events out there that we put together. Marsha, she's our community leader, and I wouldn't be able to do it without her. And she does a really excellent job of connecting us. And so a lot of things that we were discussing today here, I have learned from this lady, from Marsha. She's on the call here as well. It's just Google it, find it, just register on the website, and you'll be getting the email, and we'll just stay in touch from there. So.
And when is the next marketing clinic?
Oh, sorry. Next one is this Wednesday. So tomorrow. We'll have probably like a little larger crowd. And those of you who are a little bit aware of what's happening here in Chattanooga with the startup week and things like that, there's this program. It's called Base Camp. It's a monthly co-workings that River City Company, Innovation District of Chattanooga, City of Chattanooga are putting together. Marketing Clinic, Cresco Group, we're also kind of helping with this. We're in the planning committee and all. And the base camp is going to be happening virtually. So I encourage you to, I think they're going to start communicating all these things tomorrow. May 20th, there will be a pretty good crowd, and we'll do some marketing co-working there as well. So there's a lot of interesting, exciting things that are happening here in Chattanooga, despite the whole coronavirus. So which brings a lot of hope to me personally. So.
Thank you, Anton. Absolutely amazing as always. So inspiring, thought-provoking. Sir Eric Kruger, what's your primary takeaway from Anton's talk today?
My Lord Glenn, we banter this way. What I'm finding resonates very much with me in this coronavirus, this emphasis on community, but also this emphasis on giving. Working is giving, and giving makes you alive. Giving is living. And when I'm dealing with, in my coaching with people who have retired or who are about to retire and who are finding it not what they thought it would be, they find it a form of prolonged unemployment, and they feel unemployable. They've lost their identity, just like your father. To have, and they are in a kind of, not only in a mini depression, mild depression, but disorientation. if the isolation and self-centeredness just are self-perpetuating, and they find it very difficult. And the way out, the doorway, is community, structure, purpose, giving. And so this resonates a great deal with me. Is your father still alive, Anton?
No, he's not.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
But it must have been a very tough haul for you, and I think you've come through shining. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to mention Eric really, I have always coached a little bit, but I didn't know what I was doing. But Eric's the one that really introduced me to coaching. And and launching a new career after many of you know, I had a business I'd operated for about 25 years that went south during the last downturn in the economy. And I decided I wanted to pursue a speaking career, and well, somewhat success there. But Eric helped me to kind of find myself through coaching sessions with him. And I learned that emotional intelligence is such a tremendous part of coaching. And Eric it just oozes from him, his ability to connect and to help someone to verbalize the thoughts that maybe they're having, or things that they maybe have kind of pushed away. And so thank you, Eric. I've never taken time to really thank you.
Well, thank you, Glenn. And I've
Yeah.
learned a lot from you. Believe me, it's a two-way street.
Coach Dan, our co-organizer, I know that you've got some great thoughts about Anton's wisdom. And have you ever known a man so young that was so wise, far beyond his years?
Very few, Glenn, very few. And what I appreciate about Anton is the depth. And he relates that even at such a young age, he was looking for the purpose of life and what it was about. And I resonate with everything he says, because he started off with relating to social media. And right now we're so disillusioned with everything that goes on. And people are dying for truth. They're dying for truth and authenticity. And when we find that, it's rare. Okay. So that ties right into environment. Our environment is so important. So I think when we tell the truth, when we get in the right environment, and then when we give, we naturally connect, and that ties it all together. So everything he says, I absolutely resonate with. Those are things that I've lived in my own life. And I've learned that the more truthful I am, the more vulnerable I am. It's a superpower. And a lot of people are afraid to be truthful. So I would encourage everybody to follow that model, because it works. When you get in the right environment and you can be with other people that are truthful and authentic, the connections happen. And then just give. Absolutely, just give.
What's your thought about the study Anton shared with us about the mouse and the morphine water?
Yeah, that's a good question. In my experience with coaching, it comes down to, I mean, we work with a lot of people who maybe have depression, maybe have obstacles, they're feeling alone. And when we look at their environment, are they connected or are they not? A lot of these people are alone, or they feel alone, and they can have a great mindset, and they can have all the right tools and all the right quotes and all the right memes, and they can think, but until they're put into that environment, they may experience some success, but they won't thrive. And I'm an example of that. Is I was coming up when I was younger, I did pretty well for myself early on, and I thought I had it all figured out, but I really didn't have a clue until I took those skills and I put it in the right environment. And that's when I learned the importance of our crowds and who we hang out with, and just who we surround ourselves with. So it's absolutely true.
If you want to really learn a lot about yourself, experience a failure. We all have failures, and you've heard me say so many times, I truly believe it with all my heart. A failure is not a failure unless you fail to learn. And so, yeah, we've all had minor setbacks, but I had never really had a big failure in my life until that downturn of 2008, 2009. Everything I ever did, I was successful at it if I really set my mind to it. Let's get some females involved. How about you
I was gonna
there?
say, Glenn,
Who
I was
would
gonna
like
say
to
something.
who would like to be the aggressive one? And
Glenn, can I add something to what Dan just mentioned?
you sure can.
Dan, I think you're right on it with so what has been happening, there's a major shift that's going on right now in the way we communicate. And I think we all recognize it. And I hope you all do, especially if you're in any sort of business, you got to recognize it. What Dan is saying is basically, so what in the past few years, really just a few years, we started living through this extreme a different environment, and where there's so much information that's being thrown at us. So just naturally, we know how to adapt, we know how to learn, right? We develop new habits. And so just naturally, human beings start developing this habit where, or this ability to recognize other people's intent in just a few seconds. Are you with me? It doesn't take much for me to know that you're there trying to sell me something. Right. I just know it. I just do. But if, like Dan said, if you're there to connect with me, I also know it within seconds. There's just something in the back of my mind that just kind of screams, goes, Dan is a sales guy. No, you're not. Or, hey, Dan really means well. We know it. And what Dan is saying is basically, yeah, like there's a major shift in how we communicate. And I hope that you're all on this train that goes that direction. And it's how to be more authentic, and how to say, listen, it's okay not to be okay. I make mistakes, and if you have a problem with that, then it's okay, but I do. But that's what connects us all together. So Dan, I think you're right on point.
Yeah, right on, Anton. I believe I don't know, I can't explain how we've become that intelligent, but I think you nailed it, in that there's so much information thrown at us. Maybe 30 years ago, a salesman approach would work, but now, I mean, we see it like that. We're like, all right, back off. But if somebody's intent is truly to connect, that's different. We're open to that. So
yeah, we all know it. This guy is self-centered. Right. I'll stay away from him. Or right. This guy means well, he's here for me. That's going to be my best friend or my connection. So
right.
Marcia, what are your thoughts?
I had to unmute myself. Well, the issue of depression, I think, is something that we all need to be honest about and aware of, because I do think that the time that people are spending alone, some of that can be productive, and sometimes it just gets to be pretty intense. But what Anton was talking about, that I know that when I've gone through depression, I was thinking about myself too much. That you have to start thinking about other people, and that is the pathway out. But I think, when talking about community and connection, being aware of other people's issues with depression during this time, because some of us might not be having problems with depression. We might be having problems with other things, but sometimes just reaching out to other people and saying, how you doing? Just a simple, hey, you didn't come to a certain meeting and we've missed you, and just something like that can be the catalyst for them to feel connected again.
One way to look at it is, you don't look down at someone that's in the hole. You get in the hole with them and you help them get out.
You have to get, or can you pull them out from where you are?
Nicole,
Anton,
Oh, excuse me. That's all right, Becky. Glad to have you back.
Yeah. Anton, what you were saying about social media on the front end, I have 3 daughters, 2 of which are inching ever closer to the teenage years. And I almost every single day will say to them, comparison is the thief of joy. Don't worry about what's going on with other people, because as soon as you do, that takes away any happiness that you've had for what you've accomplished, what you've done. And anyway, so that's something that really resonated with me.
Thank you, Becky. Nicole, you've been taking lots of notes there, and you just look like you've got a question or a thought that you'd like to share.
You know, there's been so many great nuggets of wisdom in the call, and as Anton was speaking, one thing that really resonated was the point about how we draw conclusions and how they drew conclusions from the initial study of the rat with the morphine water and the regular water, and it was that how addictive the morphine water was. Well, really, the only conclusion was that the morphine was more addictive than water. But when you gave another option, the connection is more addictive than the morphine. So I made notes on that. And then something about the word addiction. I have some addictions in my family. My father, he likes prescription medication. He is still here, but Anton, you mentioned that, what was it, they consciously checked out. And my father has dealt with that for many, many years. So I resonate, I can connect with a lot of what you're saying. Somehow the word addiction has this negative connotation, and I like to think of it as it's an action. It's a repetitive action. You know, you can be addicted to work, you can be addicted to reading, you could be addicted to anything. It's not always drugs or something that has a bad connotation. I just like to think of it as it's an action, and every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And so I think about it in those terms. But I really enjoyed the talk. I do have lots of notes.
And boy, we're looking forward to hearing from you in a couple of weeks, Nicole.
Yeah, that's for sure. Hey, can I just plug also 2 cents here? What you're saying, Nicole, is also is huge. They also talk about the what's called imprinting. So in our brain, what's happening is I don't know if you guys are aware, but so a habit, we call it a habit, right? So repetitive action that's being done for many, many years. So now that they say imprinting is happening in your brain, so what happens is neurons that are make that addiction possible, that connection possible. Well, the structure of a protein changes, and it becomes more and more of a solid connection. So think about it as you walk through woods, right? There is no path out there. But if you keep going back and forth, and then all of a sudden you say, I'm going to bring my dozer here. Mm-hmm. Well, if you get to the point where there's a certain path that's being dozed, that's being paved in your brain, it's a pretty challenging to build a secondary next to it, a more healthy one. And this is really the only way to get out of any sort of, concrete paved habit. And so our brains are fabulous, and we all can heal, but we also can damage ourselves. And so I think if we're all just being aware of what's happening and how we treat ourselves, I think it's huge. Yeah. So good point.
Mirdad, you've been silent. You have a comment?
Well, in the most simplest way, every time I interact with Anton, it dawns on me that I need to be reevaluating me, you, and I appreciated Anton. It's I go to the marketing clinic just to learn and really learn, to have a balance there. Be a listener than a talker. Lots of people like to talk, including myself. It's best to be a listener and make it all about you. So I appreciate it, Anton. Thank you. of course, I learned a lot more things that I can talk all day. But in a nutshell, I appreciate it.
Well, if you have another comment, feel free to jump in. Bob, you look like you're about ready to spout some wisdom.
Well, all I can say is I like the Brussels sprouts and blueberries. So Anton needs to find some food he loves. Of course, it does put a little weight on every now and then. But yeah, no, I would also like to say thank you to Becky. That was the best way I've heard of it. Comparison is a thief of joy. Because too many of these kids, and my granddaughters are one, it's like, what can I give them? Because they are, addicted to the smartphones, and they get into these discussions texting, and it's like, and my brother's doing the same thing. That's one of the biggest problems I have with him now is he wants to text everything. I says, Vic, we can call and talk to each other, and that it's a lot, that lost connection, I think, is being driven somewhat by social media. And because people don't seem to really want to speak to somebody, and then when you get into the some of these kids, when they're on their smartphones, they take, oh, he's mad at me because he said okay. No, he didn't explain himself. Well, why don't you talk to him? No, I've been taking hundreds of notes too, and lots of good stuff. One of the things that struck me, about Anton's speech and everything, my granddaughter had a psychologist because she's got ADHD, and we were taking her, and Dr. Kiger is 82 years old. He still practices, and I asked him, you've got plenty of money and obviously, and you're well respected in the community. Why are you still working? And he said he had two partners. They both retired. In 2 years, they both died from, basically they had nothing in their lives. And that's also true with a good friend who moved down to Chattanooga, Kathy Harriman. I don't know if you know Kathy. She was on the board there at the electric board. But her parents retired. Her dad worked out, had a little plot of ground and did gardening, but it wasn't enough because they both passed away fairly shortly, a few years after retiring. And it's like they gave up on life. And so we do have to connect with people and keep and not have that lost connection. But it's a struggle sometimes on how do you actually do that when you're familiar with somebody and you don't feel that compulsion to want to talk to them per se or communicate.
Thank you. Well, Diane, I see you're unmuted, and we see you again at that expanded house you have.
Yes, yes. Hello. I've been here the whole time.
It's a wee bit sterile.
I know. I enjoyed the talk very much, and several things came to mind, and it kind of goes with what Bob was just saying. Was Anton talked about game plan, and during this downturn in the economy, our organization is all volunteer, so I do have paying work in addition, and that paying work has gone down, so I've experienced a little bit of an aimless feeling. And I've been on several Zoom meetings, and it talks about, you have to have action, you have to have a game plan. So it has caused me to be thinking about what should I be doing. So as a result of one of those meetings, I reached out to my clients recently and just touching base, and what can I do for you? How can we think about your business? I'm in public relations and also in some yacht charter sales. So obviously there's no activity with the yachts because the marinas have been closed. But anyway, so the game plan has been something that I've been missing, and I'm glad that Anton mentioned that. The other thing I wanted to comment on, well, two other things. One was his term of compassionate goals. I love that. I think that's really strong. I was on another Zoom meeting where actually it was one with the church, and the priest came on. He says, if you're feeling down, you know that other people are too. Maybe one of your compassionate goals could be to call 3 people a day, or even 3 people a week, because not only does it make a difference in their life, but it makes a difference in yours. So I've been trying to reach out more to people, give them a call, see how they're doing, and just kind of make a goal. to reach out and think about others. And I know that's an area that I could improve on, is being more other centric. And then the last thing was the thing that Anton mentioned about the path in the woods, and how if you keep doing that, you're going to engrave a path. Well, in the world of Tourette syndrome, which we're involved in, there's a therapy that's delivered by occupational therapists, and it's called CBIT. And what it is recognizing the trigger or the antecedent that might cause a tic, which is not really a habit because it's neurological, but you could look at various habits that you have and try to recognize what is going to bring that habit on. Like, if you are bored, are you going to go eat something that you shouldn't be eating? And so to recognize that, and when you feel that coming on, to develop a competing response. So it's comprehensive behavioral therapy. So you develop a competing response that you would do instead of what that trigger is that you feel coming along. And so I'm trying to work on actually a speech on that for something else I'm doing. And I just think if we can take a step back, it's not always easy to do, but if we realize that's an opportunity to change our path into a more healthy habit, we might keep that in mind.
Tom, you seem very attentive there. You have any thoughts you'd like to add, Tom Monroe? Hey, Tom, I unmuted you. Okay, looks like he's frozen. Rick, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah, well, let's see. I think one thing that Anton said was that about, well, just in general, about having a purpose. I've always had a lot of different purposes, and sometimes it comes in handy to have different, or working on different things at different times. Having something to do, like when I'm waiting for paint to dry in one project, I'm doing some other project. And what I'm trying to do now is apply that to this doll project, and also how to get it out to people, because it's gotten to where it's, because of the environment has changed completely on manufacturing, that it's actually getting back to the way I would really originally like to have it manufactured, which is certainly here in the United States. I would prefer it being made right here in Chattanooga, and that's really becoming possible. But the trick to that is some of the investors are still thinking in the old way. And so trying to find investors to invest in this, in a project that's almost like an amoeba in the way it's being made. Every 5 minutes, the new way of manufacturing is changing. And so trying to drag people along, but I think really it really comes down to what I've seen, and where I think the direction of this company is going to be going, is that being, asking the individual, whoever, what is your need? I want to supply you with your need. And knowing that I can in a certain realm, if you go straight to the people, it is really coming to a point in manufacturing that you can make individual items for people. You don't have to make 10,000, get it out to the stores, have enough of them so they can even make the orders to fill up. Like with Toys R Us, it's out of business as far as our type of product is. And when that was in business, you would have to make 10,000 something just to get it on the shelves of all their stores. Well, now you can go straight to the individual and say, what do you want? And with my design and 3D printing, because 3D printing can make molds if you want to make more than one, they can make the actual product. You can literally custom make every single piece. And I think manufacturing in general is going to be going in that direction.
So you're saying it's back to the you thing.
Yeah, it's you. What do you want? If I have the equipment to make that, I can make it for you. And I have a lot of other ideas other than this. I mean, I've been in the construction business since I was 12, and I would like to see the construction business completely rehauled. It's the one business that is so back in the dark ages that this drives me crazy. But there's whole new ways of doing it, and particularly with this new equipment that I would really like to be involved with. And it is a way to do, what do you want? And even if, say you had a house that was made out of blocks, this is a simplified version of what I've invented here. And your kids move away and you don't want that big a house, but you like your location, well, you can actually sell part of your house, take it apart, and sell that back to somebody or recycle it or whatever. I mean, it's a whole new way of doing something. And it's sort of a necessity is the mother of invention, but necessity almost always exists. So there's always another way to do something. And that's what I'm really, if I dare say, I'm enjoying the situation, because I think it's making people think out of the box. Hopefully it goes in a good direction. It certainly has an opportunity to.
And if we have in a few minutes, I think Deborah's got something to add, but I'd be thinking, Marcia, I'd like you in 15, 20 seconds to tell us about the doll, Aisha's doll, but let's get to Deborah. She unmuted and raised her hand a few minutes ago.
First, I want to really thank Anton for bringing up this whole thing of how we think and the pathways and habits. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. And I appreciate the young woman who talked about the Tourette syndrome, the mind-body connection, and trying to adjust for it. And I'll share with you that it's almost a family business. My mother pioneered special education back in the 1940s. My brother was autistic, and I thought it would be wonderful to teach, as my mother had, to teach the deaf. I was a ballet dancer. I taught dancing to the deaf. But it wasn't until I personally experienced this issue of the mind-body connection that I really understood how important it was, how complex it is. So when I was the executive director here of the Jewish Federation, I went on a mission to Uzbekistan, and I picked up some strange third world bacteria, and it affected my central nervous system, and I had to quit my job. I couldn't even go out to go grocery shopping because I couldn't find my way home. I couldn't remember how to get home from the grocery store. Now, you think you've lost everything, and you probably have. How do you reboot, right? What do you do to reconstruct yourself, your brain, your thinking, your jobs, everything? And it's been an ongoing process. And I'm amazed to hear all of these comments about through the coronavirus of how it's affecting your minds and our mental health and depressions and things like that. I'm not surprised. Maybe, you know, the misery loves company or something. And it is not an accident that my daughter turns out to be a psychiatrist, right? But the ability to do this, the flexibility of the brain, the agility to reconstruct, recreate yourself is there. And it just takes a little faith and a little doing and a little hearing from Anton to do it, because it just is an amazing experience. And even though I wouldn't wish it on anybody, I'm kind of glad. I've never been more creative in my entire life. So I'm hoping the same for everyone as we go forward in this crazy time, and just read a few poems. That will help.
Thank you, Deborah. Tom, are you still frozen, or do you have a comment? Well,
I'll share a story that I heard just the other day, and it just kind of connects to all this. Speaking of connect, it's a story of Albert Einstein. And when he was a boy, he was about 7 years old, he came home and gave his mother, excuse me, gave his mother a letter that his teacher had given him. And it was sealed in an envelope. So the mother opened it up and she read it, and tears came to her eyes, and he was like, "Oh, Mom, what is it?" And so she reads the letter, and she says, your son is a genius, and we really don't have the capacity to teach him here. And so we would like for you to teach him at home, because we don't know of another school around here that really could help him to be everything that he could be. And so he was kind of stunned, and she put her arms around him, and she says, that's what we'll do. So many years later, after his mother had died, he was cleaning some stuff out and found that letter. And what the letter actually said was, your son is mentally ill. We have no capacity to take care of him here. And there's not another school around here that can take care of a mentally ill child. So you will have to school him at home. And the power of what she said to him, how that changed his entire life and the lives of all. If we had not had his genius, it's a part of our lives. And so when you think of the power of the mind and what we think of ourselves and what we project to other people about what they are, I mean, it just, there is no limit. There's no limit.
Hey, Marcia, I want to expand on that a little bit. There's a lady, there's some parents that had a girl that was nonverbal, and she couldn't talk, of course, and they got a device for her where she could learn how to put, words together and sentences and stuff like that. And this nonverbal 11, 12-year-old girl formulated her first sentence. Can anyone guess what she said? She wrote, "Thank you for not giving up on me." So we're all in there, guys. We're all trapped in there. And it's like what Becky was saying about joy being stolen from comparison. I think about that a lot, because when I was 11, Anton, my dad left and he never came back. He's gone 36 years. He died 3 years ago. He didn't really follow what I did. So I've had to find my way through mentors and people like Dan and people like Glenn and people like Eric, and it's also you, Anton. And having those leaders in my life is able to help me get to where I'm at now. But I've had to go through a lot of comparison. Like, even my first book's about comparison. Now, to kind of talk about that, we're compared to when we go get a job. We're compared to when we go to college. And that's the unfortunate reality. However, I got some really good news I haven't shared with anyone yet. Social media, and you guys will be the first group to find this out, okay? I have a student. I have only 7 black belts in 22 years, and 2 of those are kids. And one of those kids is the valedictorian at Boyd Buchanan. And he just got accepted at Vanderbilt, and he's going to become a medical doctor. And in 30 minutes of him finding this out, he called me and told me. And he said that what I did for him in his life meant so much to him. So I want you guys to know that even though comparison is a nasty word, it's the reality we live in.
And one other thing about Corey, some of you may not know, but he's gotten international recognition for his work with children, autistic children. And so commend you for what you've done there.
Thank you. I was going to say real quick, we actually trained with the U.S. karate team. Every other week we're training with the U.S. karate team, the para team. I have an athlete on the para team. And I'm also on the athlete with disabilities committee for USA Karate for about 4 years now. So.
Folks, our time's up. We're a minute over. Let me ask you this. We all have tight schedules, and I end this promptly. But would you like to, this is so good, would you like to go for another 5 minutes? Give me a thumbs up or down.
Yes, and I have a question to Marcia. Yeah, what was the name of the person that you talked about, who his mother said he was a genius, but in fact he had mental disability? What was the name of this person?
That was Albert Einstein.
It was Albert Einstein. Wow. Who couldn't talk until he was 4, but changed the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thanks to his mother. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Glenn.
This is truly a living example of something I've said so so often, authenticity is the great connector. And, this is truly an authentic group. And I think that's the reason that we connect. And those that are new to the group, Diane, you'll find it's kind of addictive. We've come a long way since you participated in the group. And I had a flashback, Anton talking about his dad. I hadn't thought about it in a long, long time, but I grew up in a family that I really thought were teetotalers. There was never alcohol in the house. But my mom, after I was in college, was diagnosed with cancer. She had 2 radical breast mastectomies, and she couldn't sleep. She was given lots of drugs and whatever. That didn't work. And Dad got the idea of maybe a little scotch at night. And it seemed to work. And then she began to drink more of it, switched to vodka. And there toward the end, she was drinking about a half gallon of vodka a week. So here's a mother. I never saw her with a hair out of place or without a makeup on. Got a call from an aunt of mine that was about 10 years older than me that babysat for me when I was a youngster. Said, you need to come home and check on your mom. I went to the door. Every blind in the house was closed. Dad wasn't there. He was over at the farm. And finally I beat on the window where I knew her bedroom was, and I was able to get her up, and she stumbled to the door. Absolutely. Just my whole world crumbled. And it was about 2 weeks later, and talking with her, I finally convinced her that maybe she needed some help. And I took her, went and picked her up, and I'd arranged to check her into a rehab facility. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But you know what? She licked it. She got out of the rehab facility after a while. We had a dear friend at home that would stay with her. And by this time, Dad had a liquor closet there at the home. He put a lock on it, and she never, ever had another drop of alcohol. It was amazing. She could be around others that drank. It didn't bother her. But I don't know. Dad would have cocktails when he would go to different social events or whatever that I wasn't at. But I don't know. I've often thought, was it right for them to totally shelter me from something that was so addictive or not? Because when I went off to college, that's when I discovered alcohol. And oh my goodness, did I drink and drink excessively? So what the answer is, I don't know. But the interesting thing I noticed initially when we started social distancing and they determined the essential businesses that would stay open, liquor stores were at the top of the list. And they did a booming business, still are. And domestic violence is way up. People are so cooped up. I think the divorce lawyers are having a heyday. So there's some good that has come out of what we've experienced, but there's a lot of bad. But
there's some confusion too, with food delivery. I can tell you something I've personally experienced. Being at a restaurant on Gun Barrel that has burgers, you cannot get your own drink. You can't go to the screen and touch the self-service screen, but you touch the screen to put your credit card information in. And then I go across town to a sandwich shop, I won't tell you which one, and I have to get the customer their drink and put the lid on. Tell me where that makes any sense, please.
That's interesting. When they first allowed the restaurants to open up in Tennessee and and then it was by municipality. In the little town limits of Signal Mountain, the town mayor said that restaurants could open up while exercising extreme caution and social distancing. I haven't been, but there's a very popular Mexican place, El Matate, here on Signal Mountain. And when they first opened, they had the table spaced, and my neighbor went, and he said it was the funniest thing. Here were all the tables spaced apart, but there was a couple of benches as you walk in, which is where the traditional place that you wait for your table, and they were shoulder to shoulder. So how interesting. Anyone else have a burning desire to share something?
I do. It's something small, but I have all this talk of habit formation. That has been my hobby and my just obsession for many years. And there is an author, Gretchen Rubin. She wrote a book called Better Than Before, and she takes your own personality type and teaches you how to change your habits in a way that suits you, that makes it pretty easy and mindless to change your habits. And I highly, highly, highly recommend her.
And that's Gretchen Rubin.
Gretchen Rubin, and the first of these books is called Better Than Before.
Better Than Before. Awesome. Anyone else with a burning desire?
One more thing.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Talking about changing habit, it'll be a challenge for me to cook something to get Anton interested in eating.
Well, maybe when we're able to have an in-person version of the marketing clinic, you can prepare something for all of us.
That'd be great.
Of course, that was a joke, of course.
Well, I've got an idea that you're probably a pretty good chef.
I like cooking. Yes.
You like? I suspected that.
And I'm thinking for the main ingredients, to entice him, onion, garlic, and olive oil for the ingredients.
That sounds really good.
Well, you see, you might get Anton with the garlic because he's a firm believer in garlic for the medicinal purposes. Anyone else? One more time. Going once, twice. Anton.
I was just gonna plug another 2 cents, just so we can kind of walk away with another thought. So just super briefly, they've done a study and they said that kids that do extra activities besides school are more focused and effective at school. And so I think Corey was talking about the karate, and then somebody being accepted in a highly respected university and things like that. And so let's think also about ourselves. Sometimes we think that the more time is being devoted to something, the better, the more effective we are. But that's sometimes it's actually the opposite. You see, again, something that these conclusions that we always draw, I just don't have enough time. Well, kids that do, soccer and football and basketball and golf and any sort of karate things, and it occupies their time, but then they go back to school and they're more effective at what they do. And so it's almost like we all have to find that something that balances us out, something that brings us back to that groove. And so I just want to basically say, what is your thing? What is it, that one thing that, it'll occupy some time? And you may think you already don't have enough time, but that's actually that vicious cycle that we're in, and that's totally counterintuitive the way it works. But the less time we have on a certain activity, the more focused we are. And so I encourage all of you to just the weather is much better out there. I know we're not supposed to be in the social any sort of settings, but the parks are open. You can just go and do something. Just get some dumbbells and get on the bike and get going, or come to Corey's karate school. I think that's what.
No, I was just gonna say, before I learned even this, I was ice skating, so I'm a rollerblader. So anybody rollerblade out there, I'll go rollerblading with you. But if you have a bike, you're gonna leave me in the dust.
There you go. And just remember that we were talking about addictions and all these issues and all. They're all appearing as a result of us not having much going on in our lives. So let's have something interesting and exciting and meaningful, purposeful, something that relaxes you, something that is fun, helps you connect with others. It'll make you more effective, more centered, more balanced in what you do on a daily.
I've got an idea. Nicole, I want you to be thinking of a closing comment from you to entice us to come and learn from you in a couple of weeks. But I challenge each of you to think of one thing that you would like to implement in your life and that you would be willing to share at our next meeting. And I'll let you be the one to make sure I don't forget to ask about that, or you can do it, Nicole. So do you have a thought you'd like to leave us with to entice us to come to learn about Over the Mountain?
I think you set that up beautifully. This story about Over the Mountain is inspired by the first time I ever drove a tractor trailer, an 18-wheeler, across a mountain, which is a terrifying experience. My heart is racing right now just remembering that. But one thing that you would like to implement, sometimes that can be scary because it's a new habit, it's a new pattern of life, and I think that will translate really well. So I look forward to sharing that story with you. Whew, I have to calm my heart down right now. So I look forward to sharing that story with you in a couple of weeks, and I hope it will help you be successful in implementing something new in your life.
Were you by chance traveling over Mount Eagle?
It actually was not Mount Eagle Mountain, but it might as well have been Mount Everest. I think I shared with you that a quote from the first gentleman who successfully climbed Mount Everest. This mountain I drove across, I've decided that is my Mount Everest. So that first time across it.
Well, I reached out to my friend Gary Gullah, the only man in the world with one arm to summit Mount Everest. And I think he was one of my early guests on Motivation Here Special Edition that Diane participated in. And I think he would be really cool to have on the program if I can get him.
That would be wonderful.
That'll be easy. Just to update you, Sir Eric, everyone's going to think of one thing that they're going to implement in their lives to kind of change the routine or whatever, that they'd be willing to share at the next self-improvement meetup and mastermind. So be thinking of that. Folks, I love you. I love each and every one of you. Anton, thank you. You just did a phenomenal job. This was an amazing mastermind, and I learned so much from it. And I think the whole reason is because of the authenticity. Again, I love you, each and every one of you. And remember, folks, your day will be just as good as you visualize it. I'm out of here, and I'll post a recording soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Anton. Thanks, guys.
See ya.